Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I did bring the Seattle rain with me, I think. Can I just say that how much I love your royal commissions? I've quoted the ACCC several times in the US, and I love the framing around many of these issues as primarily ones about fair competition. And I wonder if we might be able to import some sort of royal commission, so we'll need to speak about that afterwards. You're probably wondering who or what is mission data, and in the next few minutes, I'd be glad to tell you a little bit about it. But you're probably also wondering, what does an American have to offer Australians at a policy conference? After all, our country isn't exactly a paragon of governmental virtue. From everything from the economy to healthcare to even energy, Australia has so much to teach America. And for example, last year, Australia installed 4 to 5 times more renewable energy than America on a per capita basis. And of course, I'm painfully aware of America's dreadful national politics. I feel compelled to offer an apology for the fire hose of bad news that comes out of Washington, D.C., from the outright corruption in Congress to the reality television star presently occupying the White House. Nevertheless, despite my government's great dysfunction and our president's shameful Twitter feed, there are, believe it or not, some exciting things happening in America, including in the energy sector. If you look not at our federal government, which generates most of the headlines, but at individual states, a very different picture emerges. For example, President Trump has made a show of his fight to preserve coal-fired power plants, not unlike some politicians here, I have heard. But at the state level, and it is the states that regulate electric utilities in the US, over 20 coal plants representing 15 gigawatts of capacity were shut down last year alone, the largest number of closures in history. There's a similar picture of progress at the subnational level that I'll share with you this morning as it relates to the portability of energy data. So who and what is Mission Data? Well, Mission Data is a nonprofit I co-founded about 5 years ago, and it came from the recognition of a common need that all distributed energy resources, energy efficiency, demand response, solar, battery storage, et cetera, all need access to smart meter data in a consistent way. America has over 3,500 retail electric utilities, and each one of them provides data in a different way. 3,500 electric utilities makes my job very difficult. And meter data is essential to valuing DER services because the utility meter is the source of truth. My organization has 2 principles. The first is the best available data about energy usage and cost should be available to customers and their authorized third parties. And 2, such access should conform to nationally recognized standards and best practices. Our vision is for zero marginal cost data exchange to be used in the competitive DER market. We have some 35 companies that are part of our coalition representing over $1 billion a year of advanced energy management services. And these firms are an economic force poised to help us reduce energy use and decarbonize the power sector, but they need high quality access to customer data in order to do it. But utilities have not shared this data willingly, even with customer consent. And this has been a state-by-state battle. To give you a sense of some of our progress at the subnational level, consider these maps. The one on the left from 2014 and 2019 on the right. In 5 years, we went from only 1 state having a data sharing policy mandate to 5 states today, with 8 more actively considering it in ongoing regulatory proceedings. This covers 36 million electric meters across the US, and that's almost half of the total number of advanced meters installed. Now, the green circle at the bottom there is the green button logo. And you may have heard about green button. I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's a standard for exchanging energy-related information. This was led by the federal government about 8 or 9 years ago, back in the good old days. Now, it's important to note two versions of this standard. There's green button download my data and connect my data. Download my data allows you to log into your utility's website and download a file, which to be useful must be manually uploaded into another service. In contrast, connect my data is an application programming interface, or API, so the customer can log in, here's an example, to the utility's website and click a button that says, please send my energy information to a third party, like a smartphone app. And the information is automatically transferred directly from the utility to the app without passing through the customer. As you might expect, to download my data hasn't been terribly useful because most energy management applications require ongoing continuous access. So connect my data is what I advocate for. And the 36 million meter number that I referenced before refers to connect my data. Now, it's not a perfect standard, and I'll tell you a bit more about why later, but green button is the standard that we've got. To fully understand why energy data portability is so needed, and needed in America, you'll need to understand a bit of history. And so let me take you back to 2005, which was a very heady time in the energy sector. I co-founded a startup near Silicon Valley called Lucid, which focused on a building dashboard product, which was a real-time energy usage dashboard for commercial buildings. And at this time, utilities were installing smart meters that were supposed to bring forth a cornucopia of energy management services and connected home appliances. Our water heaters and dishwashers were supposed to automatically balance out the intermittencies of wind power, and consumers were finally going to become participants rather than merely spectators in our collective energy demand. The smartphone was first created by Apple and released in 2007, and investors poured money into this space. Google and Microsoft even entered the fray, and some of the world's most successful investors, including Richard Branson and John Doerr, declared that transforming our energy systems was the largest wealth creation opportunity in human history. And yet, a decade later, essentially only one company ever really made it. And it seems, after such high hopes and billions of dollars invested, the most we have to show for it is smiley faces on utility bills. In the words of one venture capitalist, we wanted flying cars and all we got was 140 characters, referring, of course, to Twitter. And I think the same thing could be said about the energy management space. So, excuse me, as I tried to understand what determined the shape of this funnel, I found that the funnel was not an inevitability of technological Darwinism. It was shaped by our data sharing policies, or rather the lack thereof. Water is to ranchers in the outback like energy data is to the companies that I work with, and they've been in a drought for a very long time. And so after seeing startup after startup during this period leave the sector, I knew that I had to do something about it. So I've been working on this issue ever since. To give you a sense of our hard-won progress, in 2016, I wrote a paper called Waiting for Data. At the time, the utilization rate of energy data sharing in California here was a tiny fraction of a percent. And I identified various causes, including the lack of privacy policies and regulators' aversion to dealing with IT issues. Today, I'm proud to say that there are hundreds of thousands of customers across California sharing their energy data with third parties. This chart shows the uptake of demand response services provided by competitive firms. It's reported quarterly from 2016 through 2018. And you can see that approximately every 90 days, some 15,000 households sign up to receive an automated, or rather to provide automated or behavioral load reductions, which helps increase the amount of renewable energy on the California grid. And what this proves to me is that you can successfully use energy data portability to truly animate the market for distributed energy resources. Achieving this, however, hasn't been easy. California is just 3 utilities, so that's 3 utilities down, 3,497 to go. Whenever one issue is solved, another one appears in its place, and it's a bit like a game of whack-a-mole. Except that our utilities would love us to see us continue playing for all eternity. That's because utilities' incentives are not aligned with empowering consumers to access energy services that are available from other providers. If utilities' incentives are not properly aligned, you will face numerous battles, as I have in the US. And jumping through hoops has, by necessity, become my trade. Effective intervention in regulatory proceedings in America is already difficult enough, even without some battles that I'll tell you about here in a minute. For example, I must hire couriers to deliver 17 hard copies of my testimony to the Public Utility Commission of Texas, because in 2019 they still do not allow electronic document submissions. And I'm routinely outnumbered 10 to 1 by utility lawyers earning $500 an hour, while I argue that energy data is not the utility's proprietary and confidential business information, but energy data belongs to the customer, just as you have proposed with your consumer data right. So my advice to you today is to either structure your policies so that utilities or network providers have the correct incentives to provide data portability, or take the data platform away from them entirely and give it to another entity that is better positioned to serve the public interest. So here are 4 battles that I've faced across the country, and it's my sincere hope that you will be able to avoid some of these challenges here in Australia with a combination of thoughtful policy and political courage. Battle number 1 was over the definition of energy data and what exactly is included. Back in 2014, we made a costly mistake. We thought that it was just about the meter data. And so we got some language in an Illinois state regulation that required utilities to provide energy usage data electronically. And we thought we had won a victory, but we had neglected several other things that then became important. For example, addresses. With multi-site commercial customers, usage data alone doesn't tell you where the consumption occurred. And one of our members went to the trouble to integrate with the API provided by Commonwealth Edison, Illinois' largest utility. And they described it later as being, quote, a massive waste of time because they couldn't determine where that consumption was occurring from this multi-site customer. When asked if they would please add the addresses to the green button data file, ComEd said no, the rules had been issued by the regulator, they were in compliance, and that it would be a very costly change in their IT systems. Also, billing data is important for a number of cost management applications, particularly for commercial buildings and for multifamily properties. And then finally, there's system data. And this is information necessary to participate in the wholesale market. In the US, this is things like in which transmission control area is the customer located. This is the type of information that's only available from the utility. And this type of information asymmetry, in my experience, is routinely exploited by utilities in the US to eliminate competition. So my first lesson learned was this. By failing to specify a complete data set at the beginning, we were now playing a prolonged and expensive game of whack-a-mole. Battle number 2, awful user experiences. When we mandated a data sharing standard, we thought we were getting something as seamless and easy for customers to use as those login with Google buttons that you typically see on websites today. Well, that's not what we ended up with. Instead, the utilities proposed, like a resentful student who deliberately fails exams in school, that the best way to facilitate data sharing in a scalable manner for hundreds of thousands of Californians, that was the state policy goal, is to make them fill out a 4-page legal form and submit a wet ink signature via the post or via fax machine in order to share their data. This was their straight-faced proposal. The online version, when it finally became available, wasn't any better. In fact, it was a Kafkaesque labyrinth. We discovered, much to our dismay, that the green button standard is silent on user experience. So utilities could claim, disingenuously in my mind, that they were meeting their obligations. So when you have the wrong incentives, my second lesson learned was this. If you give utilities the smallest loophole, in this case, discretion in designing user experience, they will exploit it with aggressively obstructionist behavior. Battle number 3, IT glitches. We have 2 to 3 years of operational experience with Green Button Connect systems, and occasionally we have seen some horrific system performance that had it occurred outside the utility sector, those managers would surely have been fired, but they weren't. One glitch was the data delays. So when a customer clicks the share button, it could take hours, days, or sometimes even weeks for that data to reach its intended recipient. Another was sending the wrong data. So what the customer sees on the utility's website could be completely different from the information transmitted to the third party. And you can imagine how difficult that makes settlement at the wholesale market operator. Third was extensive unplanned IT outages. In one case, the system in Texas went offline for a period of 2 weeks with no accountability whatsoever. And then finally, there's poor conformance with the standard, with major utilities claiming that they follow the green button standard, but a simple validation website, like this one shown here, shows that they, in fact, don't. So my lesson learned was this. Without the right incentives, utilities will neglect these IT systems with a kind of nefarious incompetence. The fourth and final battle has been about privacy. And it's tempting to believe utilities when they say that they couldn't possibly provide data portability because of privacy concerns. And I liken this to my favorite Dilbert cartoon. For those of you who maybe can't see it, Mordak, the preventer of information services, says, "Security is more important than usability. In a perfect world, no one would be able to use anything." If security is your only goal, then in the ideal world, there would be no smart meters, there would be no utility websites, and there'd be no internet. Clearly, that's absurd. My lesson here is that utilities will use privacy breaches as a persuasive scare tactic to prevent meaningful action on data portability. Here's the thing about privacy. It's really easy for government to take a tough on privacy stance while dismissing the important nuances that arise when a customer wants to share their energy data. Rigorous privacy mandates can become blunt instruments, as I think was best illustrated with a conference app, rather like the one we have here today. America's annual Conference of State Regulators had an app for their conference. There's just one problem. The app violates the privacy rules that those state regulators put in place. This was an embarrassing double standard that's all too common. State utility regulators want to enjoy the conveniences of meeting people and planning their schedule at the conference, and that involves sharing their data. So how can it be reasonable to give away personal data on your phone with a single click while sharing your energy data requires a 4-page legal form and wet ink signatures? So we have to give customers data portability with the conveniences that they expect today, particularly with mobile devices, while simultaneously providing common sense privacy protections, such as ensuring informed consent. That isn't always easy, but I strongly believe that it can be done. This was an article I wrote about the app violating the privacy policies, and needless to say, it wasn't terribly popular amongst state regulators. So I'm very excited about the consumer data right, and as you begin to make it a reality, I hope you can avoid some of the mistakes that America has made. As I said, if you want to avoid the battles of deliberately poor user experiences and subpar IT systems, if you want to keep MORDAC, the Preventer of Information Services, at bay, you'll need to make a tough decision. And that decision is this. Can you create policy so that network providers and possibly retailers have the right incentives? Or do you conclude that it's not possible, that utilities and regulatory structures are beyond repair, and that data portability for the distributed energy market can only be accomplished with an entirely new entity in charge of energy data? In the US, I'm increasingly convinced that utilities are not up to the task and that the best efforts of American regulators will not fully quash utilities' anti-competitive impulses. Regulators in America are too captured by utilities, and our governmental powers are too limited. As for what's best in Australia, I hesitate to make a prescriptive proposal, but I'm sure that those of you, the brain trusts gathered here in this room, know a lot more than I do about the best answer to this question. But whichever way you ultimately choose, remember that privacy and access to information are two sides of the same coin. You can be pro-privacy and pro-customer choice at the same time. And with that, I thank you very much for the opportunity. And now that I've had a few minutes to tell you about my lessons learned, I look forward to hearing yours over the next couple of days. So thank you very much.